Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, The Youngest Are Most at Risk, Early Childhood Development in Complex Crises. My name is Regine Webster, and I'm the Vice President of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. My pronouns are she, her, and her. So a couple of reminders before we get started. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the panel presentation. If you're on Twitter, please use hashtag CDP4, the number 4, recovery. That's CDP, the number 4, recovery, to share and join the discussion. And don't forget to follow us on @FundsForDisaster. At the end of the webinar, there's going to be a short survey. If you all could please fill that out, it would just honestly help us to improve our webinar offerings and really just meet your highest and best needs. And finally, we are indeed recording this webinar. It'll be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly after the webinar is complete. Live captioning is available now via Zoom, and you can just click at the bottom on Closed Caption Live Transcript to access it. More accurate captions will be in the recording. This webinar is co-sponsored by Alliance Magazine, Giving Compass, Human Rights Funders Network, Network of Engaged International Donors, Peace and Security Funders Group, Philanthropy New York, and United Philanthropy Forum. We thank them all so much for their support. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges that we're working from the stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural disaster of colonialism as well as disasters. We acknowledge that when the United States was founded, there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation, which has had significant impact on disaster risk and on communities. We are committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people and the earth itself, and the complexities of philanthropy as connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us and acknowledge the original peoples and their elders, past and present, as well as future generations. Just a reminder of our goals for today's webinar. At the end of the next hour, funders should be able to do 3 things. First, have an increased understanding of the issues affecting children in crisis. Second, be able to identify ways to support early childhood development amid violence, conflict, displacement, and poverty. And last, have learned more about current needs and issues from case studies that are going to be presented today. Early childhood development, or ECD as we'll refer to it for the rest of the hour, is a critical period of development from birth to 8 years. Many issues affect children throughout their years, yet nowhere is this more acute than in early childhood. Approximately 90% of the brain's growth occurs within the first 5 years of life. Children's early years are the best opportunity for their brain to develop the connections needed to be healthy, capable, and successful adults. It's much more difficult for these essential brain connections to be formed later in life. A lack of access to early learning experiences can negatively impact a child's long-term success. In complex crises, children are a marginalized group who bear disproportionate impacts that follow them for the rest of their lives. Examples of hardships children living in crisis settings face include increased risk of separation from parents or primary caregivers, loss of stability and experiencing or witnessing violence, and related trauma and stress, which affects physical brain development. The following numbers help demonstrate the scale of the issue. An estimated 250 million children under 5 years in low-income and middle-income countries are at risk of not reaching their developmental potential. An estimated 87 million children under the age of 7 have spent their entire lives in conflict zones. A report out from Save the Children found that 1 in 6 children, that's 452 million children globally, were living in a conflict zone in 2020. This is a 5% increase from 2019. I'll also say parenthetically that figure that I just quoted does not include recent events, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's important to note that the number of conflicts in 2020, going back again 2 years, remained the same as the year before. Now, we have to talk about gaps. The share of humanitarian aid supporting early childhood development is complex, in complex crises is really minimal. And in fact, a 2020 report from the Moving Minds Alliance found that humanitarian aid explicitly targeting ECD was $463 million in 2018, only 2% of the total. And most of these funds went to food security and nutrition. The report also found that in 2018, just 3 bilateral donors and the European Union provided 75% of all funding for ECD and emergencies. Philanthropy has played a growing role in funding ECD in complex crises and is working toward increasing investment in and attention on ECD. For example, the Moving Minds Alliance is a funders collaborative that exists to scale up coverage, quality, and financing of support for young children and families affected by crisis and displacement. Additionally, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the LEGO Foundation each made grants of $100 million in recent years for ECD and emergencies programs. Yet, there is more that philanthropy can do to build upon this momentum. Now, it is my honor to introduce our special guests. I'm so looking forward to the information that they'll share with us. Hannah Green joined Save the Children in Mozambique in 2019 as the case management specialist. She subsequently joined the Afghanistan team in 2020, where she is currently the mental health and psychological support technical advisor, working toward integrating and strengthening MHPSS throughout the country office's programs. Dr. Ghassan Issa is a Lebanese community pediatrician who's been the general coordinator of the Arab Network for Early Childhood since 2012 and the general coordinator of the Arab Resource Collective. Within this capacity, he supervised the implementation of several responsive parenting and mental health and psychosocial support programs among refugees and host communities during the crisis in many Arab countries. Lydia Mabrour is an ECD specialist with 11 years experience in multi-sectoral early childhood policy, advocacy, and programs. She is an alumni World Bank Early Years Fellow, that is so cool, and global leader for young children. Lydia's played a key role in the policy development, dialogue, and advocacy for ECD in Uganda. She served as policy and advocacy for IRC under the LEGO-funded Play Matters project. She's currently the lead consultant for the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation's work on ECD and livelihoods for refugees in Uganda. Huge round of welcome to each one of you, and thank you so much for the time that you're taking to share your expertise with us. Hannah, let's go ahead and start with you. Can you tell us what are the key issues affecting young children in Afghanistan currently?
Sure, thanks, Regine. I think initially it's really important for us to know that 47% of the population in Afghanistan are under 15 years old. So the crisis is really a children's crisis, but I'm going to highlight just a few of the key issues. Next slide. One of the biggest issues is education. An estimated 4.2 million children are out of school, of which 60% are girls, and a further 10 million children are at risk of dropping out of school due to formal schools not having funds to continue. Another really important issue is stunting and malnutrition. Afghanistan continues to be one of the highest rates of child stunting at 36%, which has serious implications for children's long-term physical and cognitive development, like you mentioned earlier. Not only is stunting a problem, but malnutrition still causes substantial mortality and morbidity in Afghanistan. 3.9 million children under 5 are acutely malnourished. And the number of dangerously malnourished children visiting Save the Children's mobile health clinics in Afghanistan has more than doubled since August 2021. The economic crisis also has a huge impact on children. Afghanistan is facing total economic collapse, and 97% of the population could plunge into poverty. The impact of the economic crisis pushes families to take desperate measures just to make ends meet, which increases the child protection concerns. Selling possessions, cutting back on meals, pulling children out of school to work, Early marriage and even giving children up in exchange for money are some of the tragic lengths that families are going to. According to one of our recent surveys, up to 1/5 of families in Afghanistan have been forced to send their children out to work as incomes have plummeted in the last 6 months, with an estimated 1 million children now engaged in child labor. Subsequently, many of these children are not in school and denied access to education and face a future where they are not physically, emotionally, and psychologically ready for, which has a devastating impact on their health and mental well-being. These are just some of the top line issues that children are facing in Afghanistan. Thanks, Rufine.
Hannah, you again, please. What innovations, approaches, and promising practices are Save the Children and other NGOs and partners implementing to support ECD in Afghanistan?
Thanks. Within Afghanistan, we really are trying to strengthen and scale up the activities related to ECD as we realize the importance of it and the impact of it. So I'm just going to highlight just a few of the approaches that we're following. So the first one is building brains. As you mentioned earlier, the development of the first few years of a child's life are really critically important, but millions of children really miss out on these opportunities. So we are really trying to meet this need by implementing our Building Brains approach, which aligns with the Nurturing Care framework and promotes children's development from birth to 3 years old. It is an integrated approach that we run within our mobile health teams, focusing on children identified through our malnutrition screening. It is in the framework of a support group. And so within Afghanistan, it is still emerging and developing. We have recently begun to work in some hard to reach communities which were not accessible for the last 20 years due to security. And in these communities, there are no schools or no other services available. So educating caregivers to support and stimulate their children is really the best strategy. A second approach, which has just been recently piloted, was exploring our emotions. Sesame Workshop and Save the Children have co-created and piloted content, which includes audio stories, books, and games, all focusing on helping children 4 to 12 gain skills that contribute to a child's emotional well-being. With the generous support of CDP, we're continuing to expand this content to support Afghan refugees and host communities in Pakistan. It includes the content from Exploring Our Emotions, but adds an additional package called Welcome Sesame, which focuses on children who have been displaced and are adapting to their new environment. It will use play-based approach to improve children's social emotional well-being, while also supporting families and communities to provide an enabling, nurturing, and stable environment. Apart from this, we also have the preschools and ECCD centers. As mentioned, often in other contexts, this is a common approach, but in Afghanistan, it is not. Early childhood development is not part of the national education system. So in all of the communities we work in, these are the only ECD centers. So we currently support 95 school-based preschools for children between 5 to 7 years old. As mentioned, no national curriculum exists. Therefore, huge efforts on advocacy were needed for the schools to create a space for us to establish these classes. Our programs track these children until grade 5, and the level of dropout is far less for the children who attend the preschool than other children. And confidence within the formal classroom is also increased after attending the preschool. We also conduct home-based ECD centers for children 4 to 6 years old. These centers are facilitated by volunteers within the communities, many of which are young women, and as part of this program, we train these local young women. Again, advocacy and awareness within the communities has really proved to be an important step within ensuring these ECD centers' sustainability. Lastly, just local organizations. There are really so many national organizations who are having great success with ECD as well. So I'm going to share one example of Naikala. Naikala has been running 65 preschool classes in provinces of Bamiyan and Daikundi. And their program is planned over 6 years, where the first 3 years they are fully engaged, and in the following 3 years, they progressively step back and hand over completely to the community. Many local smaller organizations who have strong ties with the community have a lot of power to advocate for the needs of children and promote early childhood development. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. What would you like funders to know about supporting ECD in complex humanitarian emergencies?
Thanks. I think it's really important that they know that the first years of a child's life are a really unique period for development, but millions of children miss out. And why is this? And I really feel it's because it is often not prioritized by donors and NGOs, and focus is given elsewhere. So we as a community really need to advocate for this to change and for ECD to become a priority. Also to note that the return on investment on ECD may not be visible for years to come and is sometimes really difficult to measure, but the cost of not investing in children's early outcomes is huge. Then, as previously mentioned, that the ECD attendance correlates to retention in schools. And so by ensuring we focus not only on the formal learning, but also on ECD, the outcomes of our education in emergency activities could significantly improve. Then specifically for Afghanistan, we really are trying to strengthen and get ECD added to the national curriculum. So initial progress has been made, but further support is needed for advocacy and development to ensure this work continues. And lastly, many of the best placed actors on ECD are local organizations, but these local organizations are the ones who find it the hardest to access big donor funds in complex emergency. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Hannah, I particularly love so many things about what you just said, but two stood out for me really loudly. And the first is that it's going to take years to reap the benefits of supporting ECD, right? Like we need to see these children grow and mature. And the second is that focus on supporting local organizations. So thank you so much. Let's turn now to speaking with Dr. Ghassan Issa. Ghassan, can you tell us about the key issues affecting the youngest refugee children in the Arab world?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much first for giving me this opportunity. Same as all other countries, determinants of early childhood care and development in the Arab countries are poverty, political instability, inequity, and gender discrimination. Now, over and above these determinants came the elements of the complex humanitarian crises. That is the climate, the conflict, and the COVID, leading to the following. Now, ECD in complex humanitarian crises is becoming a global issue, not restricted to a few hot spots here and there. It is interconnected. Food shortage due to the war in Ukraine will increase the number of starving children in Yemen, for instance. It is ongoing. Millions are threatened to die of starvation daily, and the famine classification is reaching the highest phase of acute food insecurity, IPC5. It is multidimensional with the impact of the determinants and the elements. It is multisectoral. It's not only health or early learning or protection, it's all together in a holistic and integrated way. What's becoming more apparent now are the double standards in dealing with refugees of different nationalities. Children and their families are the most affected with an increase of all types of physical injuries, toxic stress, domestic violence, health hazards, retarded learning, lack of security and safety, mental health disorders, and food security. And what is most important is the loss of most of the children's well-being achievements gained over the past year. We are getting to the rare now. The ECD crisis in Ukraine is not the first and will not be the last. Afghanistan, as an example, the Rohingya, the South Africa until the border of the US with Mexico, in addition to the Arab countries. In most Arab countries for tens of years now, we have been facing a chronic, multidimensional, multi-sectoral crisis with recurrent acute exacerbations every now and then. In Yemen, for instance, we have been having this war for 10 years. In Syria, 11 years. In Lebanon, for 3 years, the crisis is. In Palestine, it's 74 years. In Iraq, it's 19 years. Each of these countries has different phases, different prevailing elements, and levels of crises, but all are in a childhood humanitarian crisis situation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And tell me, what have you and your colleagues discovered through your ECD research in crisis settings?
Yeah, sure. I will just describe 3 researches that we did very quickly. The first is about parenting program that we call Health, Early Learning and Protection Parenting Program, the HEPPP, that was developed in 2012, building on our experience in implementing the MUSD program that addresses mothers only. 4 innovations were added here. It is a multi-sectoral, holistic, and integrated approach to ECCD, early childhood care and development. It addresses fathers and mothers together as a couple, a family. It addresses early childhood from the beginning to 8 years, not only preschool, and it depends on a parent-to-parent system to increase the outreach. During the last 10 years, we have been testing and evaluating this HEPPP in different Arab countries with refugees and host communities in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Egypt, for instance. And HEPPP proved to be improving aspects of parenting practices and disciplines and the parents' well-being. Now, on the slide, the 3rd paper was about HEPPP implemented when the lockdown started after the pandemic. We digitized the whole HEPPP and put it online. And this gave us the opportunity to compare 3 different delivery methods of the program. A face-to-face method, a face-to-face by the Sanad parents, that is in Arabic, it's the supporting parents, that is the family-to-family approach, and the online modality. Each method improved some but different aspects of parenting practices and disciplines. A 3rd research was about caregiving of young children, the repercussions and challenges of crisis in 6 Arab countries. And we took the pandemic as a case study. It was an online questionnaire and will be published within the coming few months. Thank you. Hello.
I'm so sorry, I didn't come off mute. I was just saying, Ghassan, I'm going to ask you a question similar to what I asked Hannah, which is how can funders better support ECD in complex humanitarian emergencies?
Yeah, sure, they can do a lot. Funders can be the global voice of early childhood in crises by building up systems, mechanisms to reach every child in the last corner of the globe. Here are a few ideas to think together about. The child needs to be addressed not alone, but within his ecological surrounding, especially with his parents and caregivers. Ukraine was not the first and will not be the last crisis. How to prepare for the coming crisis? embedding preparedness within ECD programming. Contextualization of response. This is very important for each and every community and country alone. Phases, levels, prevailing elements, and entry points differ in each community and country. Will you support, for funders, will you support refugees in a community as such, a country as such, rather than addressing one cross-cutting theme in all communities, that is taking, for instance, early learning alone and then supporting that? A fifth point is the long-term projects with gradual scaling up versus limited short-term projects. A sixth point, supporting regional national networks, working groups, rather than only one organization. That is, get local organizations together to address the issues rather than getting them one by one to address a part of early childhood development. Funders will need to get together themselves in consortia to address multi-dimensional and multi-sectoral elements of ECD in crisis. And last, although basic needs are very important and much needed in crisis, yet research is also essential in crisis to orient and guide programming and going on. Thank you.
Ghassan, what I love so much about these recommendations that you provide here, both on the slide as well as the context you provided through your answer, is that these to me seem really very actionable for funders to kind of hang their hat on. So I really appreciate that. Let's go ahead and bring Lydia into the conversation. Lydia, given your work with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and the LEGO-funded Play Matters project, what are some priority ECD interventions donors are funding and why?
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank CDP for the opportunity to share some of these experiences with the team. There is, first of all, just to say that Uganda is one of the countries that has a very open policy for people in crisis, especially the refugees, and almost 52% of the refugee population in the country is made up of children and women. So 59% of the population is just made up of women and children, with a lot of children between 0 to 4 years, and that's the youngest, making up almost 26%. So in terms of early childhood, indeed, there is a lot that is going on in country. And with the work that I've been doing with currently with the Conrad Hilton Foundation, there is, and also LEGO Foundation and a number of other donors, there is a focus right now on play, promoting play for children and in crisis as a way through which we can enhance their physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development, but also to use play to promote healing for children in crisis, those that have been in crisis for a long time, and even for the onset risks and crises that are happening. Play is being really elevated as one of the key interventions that can support our children, first of all, with resilience and getting well, but also to be able to address their developmental domains. And this is happening at different levels, at the home level, at the community level, and even in child-friendly spaces that have been created within the different places where people that are facing risk and crisis are staying, or space has been provided for. And another one that is key, that is a key intervention, is promoting parenting. The parenting interventions are very key, especially as we try so much to do nurturing care for children and a focus on responsive care, health and nutrition, safety and security, which is most times not easy to come by for children and parents that are undergoing crisis. So most development partners and donors are really focusing on what does the parenting package look like? How do we get parents to understand their roles, sensitize them to be able to provide care for their children, even when they themselves need mental support and well-being, but also to try as much as possible to meet them at their points of need, to meet parents, to try and understand them and see how they can work with parents to promote care and development for their children through the little things under different sectors, growth monitoring, health and nutrition, under the health sector, spaces for early learning, parents using age-appropriate activities at home to support their children with numeracy and literacy, and then things like, you know, bonding and attachment, and encourage them to talk to their children, to play with their children, to listen to their children. And another key one is right now two-generational support for children and parents living in crisis. Just that, because for a long time there's been interventions that are focusing, for instance, on early learning in a sectoral way, like then you have those that are focusing on health. There is now a lot of support, and even with the Conrad Hilton Foundation, the focus is around how childcare can be matched with livelihoods, because many of the people that are living in crisis are actually already living in very high levels of poverty and not able to look after their children. So as you look at an essential package of services for them to give their children, you also looking at what do they have at their disposal to be able to provide the needs that their children have, and looking at how do you promote employment and entrepreneurship, and linking it to childcare and linking it to nurturing care for young children so that parents are able to really support. Thank you.
Lydia, you were able to unpack such a complex topic there. I just learned so much from you. Thank you so much for that. So break it down for me. What are 2 or 3 steps that you would suggest for funders who want to begin supporting ECD programs in crisis settings? Like, where do you start?
Well, I think first of all, it is to consider the nature of crisis that we are looking at. There's crisis that has been going on for so long, and there's crisis that is some acute threat, onset crisis that comes with a lot of acute threat and unexpected disasters for children. And so in trying to model childcare and development for both of these, it really, the programming may differ, but important that we look at a coordinated approach. We look at a coordinated package of services that is very, very important for the development partners and the donors and the philanthropic organizations to consider. And I think just to put back to what Dr. Xan has said, that in many cases when we give like early learning without nutrition, and then we give responsive care in some cases, or as it is in most cases focused on child protection, then we are giving a package that is not full, a package that does not enable the child to get a comprehensive form of nurturing care. And that is very, very key in supporting and providing services for children and families in crisis. I think another key thing is to do with coordination. For a long time, coordination of early childhood is a very complex process in most countries where there's a conflict or crisis, and most times you find that the different partners are not, they work together in form of working groups, but how to make sure that this coordination goes right up to the upper level, at the strategic level of advocacy, so that it's coordinated advocacy for young children. And this will go a long way in ensuring that early childhood development is integrated within the humanitarian response plans, and that as a critical need, that childcare is considered as an approach within the different plans that are supporting crisis and emergency, because when that is not happening, then the priorities are being put elsewhere. And yet we know for sure that early childhood development is the core pillar for every response strategy in conflict and crisis settings. And I think philanthropic organizations should continue to raise the profile for investing in early childhood within such settings and ensuring that it's receiving the attention and support needed for lasting change. And another key thing is to see to it that needs assessment are including early childhood development right from the onset, right from finding out what needs are in place and what support is needed, that right from that start, that early childhood will be included, and the outcomes of the needs assessment then provide an opportunity to advocate and to bring all the partners on board. And lastly, communities have a stake in the solution, ensuring that we are incorporating the communities that are facing crisis in determining what their needs are is very, very key in taking all this forward. Thank you very much.
Again, Lydia, what you're saying makes so much sense to me. I'm a parent of school-age children, and it's all integrated, right? Like it's inextricably linked, childcare with education, with work, with everything. So the way you explained that, again, really resonates with me from an intuitive perspective. All right, it's time for us to go now to audience Q&A. We've actually received several questions in advance, and I'm going to be working through that list as well as any that we've received here. I see there's 2 questions right now in the Q&A box. And I just want to say as a reminder, our webinars are really aimed at providing education for the philanthropic community. So while we welcome all questions and we welcome anyone to pose a question, we're going to focus our first Q&A on those that address specific funder issues. So let's dive in here. And I'll say, Lydia, Ghassan, Hannah, you all can sort of come off mute if you think you're the best person to answer this, and I'll help think through which one of you might be poised to answer. So let's see, can you talk more about the impact of crisis on early childhood? Hannah, do you want to do a quick rundown of the stats and facts that you posed at the beginning? I think we'd all appreciate hearing those again.
Sure, I can do that. In an overview, I think if we're looking at early childhood development, I think the stunting and the malnutrition are really big impacts with families, communities not being able to meet the needs of children. Then their developmental stages really decrease. And then even just in terms of economic crisis or having to move and being displaced, and the stress on parents and their ability to be responsive to children while trying to also look after the basic needs, that can also really impact the level of responsive caregiving, as Lydia mentioned. That is really so important in terms of the development of children. So those are the first 2 that really come to mind out of all of the points that I mentioned for early childhood development.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for that recap. Lydia, you supported the education response plan for refugees in Uganda. How have you advised that the response plan integrates priorities for young children in refugee settings?
Thank you. So we have reviewed the education response plan for Uganda, which the first one was 5 years ago, and the first response plan did not prioritize early childhood development as a key subsector with key goals and priorities for implementing education within crisis and emergency. But currently we came up with an ECD task force that included all the partners that are implementing early childhood development from gender and social development, then to health and education, and try to make sure that the early childhood centers within the refugee and host communities are used as integrated service points for services for young children. The response plan focuses on the 3 to 5 in terms of early learning, but the Ministry of Education in Uganda has included the 0 to 3 under childcare, and the current plan is really looking at how to integrate childcare as a package within the ECD centers, and also how to use the ECD centers as hubs for parenting, as hubs for play, as hubs for psychosocial support, while as much as possible training frontline workers and ECD caregivers to provide early learning in both formally and informally, using play-based approaches as much as possible, and ensuring that parents are able to come to the ECD centers as hubs and support in making local materials for play, but also in supporting and tracking development for their children. And then lastly, we are also looking at an advocacy strategy for increasing investment for early childhood within the bigger response plans, also looking at most of the education development partners do not really consider early childhood as a priority. So the current response plan is really emphasizing that as long as a partner is funding education, that it's important that they start with early learning. And with the support of Lego Foundation, there's such an increased support and increased emphasis on learning through play. And so most of the organizations and partners that are supporting early learning in the refugee settlements are actually using play-based approaches that integrate parenting and integrate growth monitoring. And so we are hoping that we are going to offer an integrated service delivery package for children for 0 to 3 for the daycares and 3 to 5 for early learning centers as learning hubs within the refugee communities and the host districts. Thank you.
Again, that makes so much sense, and it just feels so grounded, your advice there, Lydia. And Leah, I'm going to come to you again because in truth, I skipped over one of your questions earlier, so I want to go ahead and ask it now. You know, globally, ECD is underfunded, as we identified at the beginning of the webinar, and it's not always well coordinated or systematically in crisis settings. Given that gap, how do you see philanthropy changing the status quo? And can you reference any good examples?
Okay, thank you. Like I said earlier, that philanthropy organizations would support in building upon the current momentum and identifying strategies that will lead systemic change in the delivery, in the programming, and in ensuring that actually the services really reach children, but also much more in supporting and financing programs for early childhood. Like we all know that generally donor support for ECD, like Hannah has said, is particularly under prioritized. And this is even worse now after at the onset of COVID-19. I do think that for sure, one of the key things that we need to kind of look at is, again, to promote an integrated approach to improve child development outcomes with entry points that just go beyond protection, but kind of bring all the subsectors together. And then also looking at models that are working, that can be tested within the different contexts and within different crises and countries. But specifically for Uganda, right now, we have the ELMA Foundation. The ELMA Foundation is really supporting a coordinated effort for delivery and response to early childhood for children and families in crisis, and has come up with its leadership, has been able to come up with a community of practice that brings together different organizations just to think about what is the service being offered by both the INGOs and the local organizations, where are the entry points, but also where are the points points where we meet and ensure that it is coordinated and we are not duplicating what is being offered in the different localities. And another key thing under that is the coordinated advocacy, which I think philanthropic organizations can still support, because you find that in most cases there is no effort. The efforts are there, but they are not firm in trying to ensure that when the plans are out and the financial tracking is happening by the heads of the different responses, that ECD is coming through, the indicators, and ECD is reflected through the data. And I think that is something that philanthropic organizations can pick on as a core pillar for every response strategy in both the conflict and crisis settings. And another one, which is so key, picking from the work that I'm doing with Hilton Conrad Foundation, is working with the local organizations that are on ground. We know that for sure, like for Uganda, we are in the process of working on the localization agenda. And you find that in so many cases, and I think it's Anna who had mentioned this, that the local organizations end up not do not have the capacity to even qualify for some of the support, but yet they offer more contextualized, culturally based, and a clear understanding of what would be the best services to offer at the different, for communities in a way that is cultural, in a way that fits within their settings. And I think there's a need to move towards identifying who are the local actors on ground, how far do they go, and maybe even build their capacity. And this is key because it increases sustainability of these programs, but we also know that anytime there's an onset of an emergency, there are already local partners on ground, not like for Uganda, where we keep hosting, for instance, in the refugee communities and host districts, we keep hosting refugees that are coming in from DRC, from Rwanda, and from all these countries. And it's key that the donors and some investors start to look at who are the local organizations on ground and what's the package of services that they can offer, where are the capacity gaps, and how do we build them to ensure that they're the ones supporting provision of services right from the point when children are coming in at the places of registration, and right in when they settle, and make sure that there is a complete package of service that which we are all contributing to, but which local organizations are championing. Thank you very much.
That's so helpful, Lydia. And the focus on localization is a great segue to our next question. Ghassan, you answered it in the chat, but I think that everybody would love to hear more context of what you just said. We've got this question: how can we encourage funders to be more willing to yield control of funding implementation to local organizations who have a better idea of the real needs occurring in crisis settings?
Yeah, well, there are two things that can be done. First, being more of partnership rather than donors and recipients relationship. When you are dealing with partners, these ideas will be for the benefit of the child and his family rather than for the benefit of one of the parties. The other thing is that when you have an idea and it is evidence-based, and this is the importance of research even in acute crisis, because it is difficult sometimes. I'm here talking from experience. It is difficult sometimes to convince donors, which is in a way they are right that his basic needs are important when you are in acute phases of the emergency. But at the same time, research, which will give evidence base to the ideas, is very important to guide the programming and to convince the donor. Thank you.
Again, that's so wise, Ghassan. Hannah, I think that you'll have an answer to this. Are any of the ECD or ECCD programs being discussed intentionally and proactively disability inclusive?
Hi. I think Dr. Ghassan also mentioned it, but I know that we are trying to make sure that they are inclusive within our context, to make sure that they are accommodating for all children. But I do think it is still an area of growth that we're trying to expand on within Afghanistan. But maybe Dr. Ghassan can also share a bit more on some of the global developments.
Yeah, well, we all implementing agencies, whether they are regional, national, or international, tries hardly to include disabilities in their programming and implementation. I put in the chat the links to our HEPPP program, which we implement in Arab countries. And this one, we depending on the Convention of the Right of the Child, we had this holistic, integrated, and inclusive approach to early childhood care and development. It is one of our essential, and like all other organizations working in the field, Save the Children, IRC, everybody, UNICEF, WHO, all nowadays, their programs are inclusive, definitely. I didn't see any program which is not that way. Thank you.
That is promising, very promising. Hannah, there's an open question right now that's asked of you. Do you have anything to add about what's your advice to donors to structure grants and funding to take local organizations into consideration? They're so important.
Sure, thanks. I think some of it has been addressed with Lydia and Dr. Ghassan, but I think if donors are a little bit hesitant to work directly with local partners, I think it is important that they maybe structure it in a right way, that they ask INGOs to partner with local organizations and to slowly build their capacity so that they are able to support and to take on some of the bigger asks from donors. So I think it's really important that the donor pushes for partnerships with local NGOs.
Makes perfect sense. Do you want to dive into Ghassan? Please go ahead.
Very quickly, if we are dealing with early childhood care and development in humanitarian crises, and it is becoming, and it is multi-dimensional and multi-sectoral, the response should be the same. That is, funders should get together to address these issues, not taking one element alone. It is a holistic, integrated approach. When we talk about children, they are not, it is a whole, it is a unit. Child is a unit. A child needs his nutrition, mental health, learning, health, everything together in the same time. It's very, very difficult, and it's only on our desks that we separate these issues into health alone, early learning alone, and protection alone. I think it's very important to address community, to addressing a community-based approach that is taking a community, a country together of different funders, addressing the whole multidimensional and multi-sectoral elements, and encouraging a national organization to come together and work on these issues. It's not one single donor can help or can solve the problems, and not one single national organization can do that also. Thank you.
Again, such good grounded wisdom that you're offering there. Yeah, tell me what you see in terms of the beneficial aspects of both funder collaboratives as well as NGO collaboratives in terms of supporting ECD?
The question is for me?
Oh, I was hoping Lydia would chime in.
Yeah, sure, of course. I already answered
We love your answers, don't worry.
that.
Lydia, are you still with us? All right, Hannah, would you be willing to speak to that? I know you definitely have experience in this collaborative. Can you tell us what you think? How do both funder collaboratives as well as NGO collaboratives really benefit the work?
Can I hand over to Dr. Ghassan? Sorry.
Absolutely, totally.
Yeah, sure. I think we already have examples about that. That is when the different organizations come together to address early childhood as an entity, early childhood care and development as an entity, not health of children alone. That will go something medical, I would say. But when you talk, when you go to address the child as a unit, okay, you can't but be collaborative together, whether it is for donor agencies or for national organizations. For instance, there are the examples of the Moving Mind Alliance, for instance, the example of Early Childhood Peace Consortium, the Early Childhood Action Network. All these are groups of organizations.
Let me jump in really quickly to ask a clarifying question, Ghassan. Tell us what the benefit is of those collaboratives.
Addressing all the needs of children together. Because a child cannot grow and develop with a unilateral address of his needs. You can't expect a child to grow and develop with health only. What about early learning and protection and nutrition and the mental health, everything? And it's all there in one place, the child and his family also, of course.
Maybe.
Again, so grounded and wise. Lydia, are you going to come in?
Thank you. Maybe just to add to what Dr. Ghassan is saying is, it really helps to build a multi-stakeholder platform when the funders come together, but also have a more coordinated kind of responses, because then they are able to sit together and know where the gaps are in terms of the different services that children need as a whole. And you find that if this is not happening, you will find that the same communities are receiving services from more than one partner, and you find that all services are going to a particular maybe community or district at the subnational level. But when they are working together, there is coordinated effort to even know where there is need to put more resources in terms of the numbers and the geographical setting for children and families in crisis. And then also it also helps to increase the financing actually when it is being brought together. And then, like Dr. Ghassan has said, be able to together determine and say responsive caregiving is part is a key need for these children, but it's receiving very little. Like when you look at the early childhood subsectors, you find that some sectors are not really tracked, and some sectors there is no data or indicators to track. For instance, responsive caregiving, most of the play and stimulation, just now that there's indicators on play that are coming up, but before there's not been clear indicators on how to track that. And if you can also see from the Nurturing Care Global Framework, there are really no particular country, the country tracking for that is not coming through. But when the different partners come together, some of these get addressed at that level. the financing gets to
And
increase.
that makes so
And
much sense.
then, yeah, and then at the INGO level, and I think Dr. Sanzanda talked about the need to work with the working groups, because at that level, there is a lot of learning and cross learning that happens when the different partners are, for instance, under a particular working group. There are models that the new partners should not start afresh when there are particular models that have shown that they're working and they can instead be scaled up. And all these are things that can be reaped from working groups and from working together, meeting often, learning from each other, and being able to trace and analyze where the gaps are and how together we can address the needs of children as a coordinated and wholesome
I love
approach.
that. And I hate cutting off this really rich conversation, but we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to zip through in 14 seconds or less some closing thoughts. You know, when I think about some actionable thoughts from our conversation, they are fourfold. 1, invest in coordinated action and join existing collaboratives. 2, advocate for systems change. 3, support local organizations working on ACD. 4, take action, even if it is a small step. So I really do want to thank you. This is unfortunately all the time that we have for today's webinar. I want to thank so much our co-sponsors, and especially Hannah, Gaston, and Lydia for taking the time to share your insights with us. Don't forget, you're going to get a post-webinar survey in a hot minute. We'd be so thankful if you filled it out. If you do have any questions or thoughts that weren't addressed during today's call, please email them at Tanya, which is tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. My sincere thanks to all of you today. I know I've learned a ton. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.